Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little brutal. A time when entertainment meant death and glory came with a very short lifespan. We're diving into what it was really like to be a gladiator in ancient Rome. Forget the heroic warriors Hollywood sold you. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day in the arena. So before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more boring history that'll help you drift off to sleep. Now, dim the lights, get cozy, and let's explore a world where your morning routine could be your last. Welcome to the life of a Roman gladiator, where every sunrise might be your final one, and every meal could be your last supper. You blink awake in your cell as the first light of dawn creeps through the iron bars. Your bed is nothing more than a thin straw mattress crawling with lice and bedbugs that have feasted on your blood all night. The stone walls around you are damp with moisture, and carved with the desperate scratches of previous occupants, some marking days until hoped for freedom, others simply the frantic scraping of men driven mad by fear. The wake-up call isn't gentle. A guard pounds his wooden club against the metal bars, creating a deafening clang that reverberates through your skull. Around you, dozens of other gladiators stir in their cells, many groaning from injuries that never properly healed, others weeping quietly as they realize they've survived another night only to face potential death in a few hours. Your morning routine begins with checking your body for new injuries from yesterday's training. Every gladiator sleeps with their wounds, and infection is a constant threat. You probe the deep gash on your shoulder from a training sword, feeling the heat of infection beginning to set in. There's no medical care beyond what you can provide yourself. Gladiators are valuable property, but only if they can fight. If you can't perform, you're worthless. The smell in the barracks is overwhelming. Dozens of unwashed men, open wounds, human waste, and the lingering stench of fear-induced vomit create an atmosphere so thick you can taste it. Some gladiators have been here so long they no longer notice the smell, but newer arrivals spend their first weeks constantly fighting the urge to retch. Breakfast arrives through a slot in your cell door, a bowl of barley porridge mixed with beans and whatever scraps the kitchen slaves could find. Sometimes there's rotten meat, sometimes just more grain. The food is designed to keep you alive and build a muscle, not to taste good. Many gladiators force themselves to eat despite having no appetite, knowing that weakness from hunger is a guaranteed death sentence. As you eat, you listen to the conversations echoing through the barracks. Veterans share advice about fighting techniques, newcomers sob quietly, and everyone discusses the day's scheduled matches. The experienced gladiators can often predict who will die, based on matchups and fighting styles, and these predictions are usually accurate. You learn to read these signs yourself, understanding that knowledge of your opponent's weaknesses might be the only thing standing between you and death. The guards begin their morning rounds selecting gladiators for the day's events. Each name called could be a death sentence. Some men have been here for years, surviving dozens of matches through skill and luck. Others die in their first appearance, lasting only minutes before being cut down by more experienced fighters or wild animals. You notice new arrivals being processed. Slaves captured in recent military campaigns, criminals sentenced to the arena, or debtors sold to pay off obligations. They're easy to spot by their expressions of shock and terror as they realize what their lives have become. Most won't survive their first month. The few who do will be forever changed, their humanity slowly stripped away by the constant proximity to death. The morning inspection follows breakfast. Guards examine each gladiator for signs of illness, injury, or rebellion. Any sign of weakness results in punishment, extra training, reduced rations, or assignment to more dangerous matches. You've learned to hide your pain and fear, standing straight despite the agony shooting through your injured shoulder. As the morning progresses, the reality of your situation settles in once again. Your property, owned completely by your lanista, the gladiator trainer who decides whether you live or die. Your life has no value beyond your ability to entertain crowds with violence. Every morning brings the same uncertainty. Will you survive another day, or will tonight find your body being dragged from the arena sand? This is how every day begins for a gladiator, with the knowledge that it very well might be your last. After the morning inspection, you're herded into the training yard along with the other gladiators. The training ground is a rectangular courtyard surrounded by high walls, topped with sharp spikes to prevent escape. The sand beneath your feet is stained dark with the blood of countless training sessions, and the smell of old blood mixed with fresh sweat creates a nauseating atmosphere that clings to everything. Your trainer, a former gladiator who survived long enough to retire, approaches with a collection of wooden practice weapons. His body is covered in scars, each one a story of survival in the arena. He's missing 2 fingers on his left hand and walks with a permanent limp, but his eyes are cold and calculating. He's seen hundreds of gladiators come and go, and he can usually predict within days how long a new fighter will survive. Training begins with basic conditioning. You run laps around the courtyard while wearing full armour and carrying weapons, building the stamina you'll need to fight for extended periods. The armour is heavy and poorly fitted, designed more for protection than comfort. The weight of it makes every step an effort, and sweat begins pouring down your body within minutes. The heat is unbearable. Rome's Mediterranean climate means training often occurs in temperatures that would be dangerous even without physical exertion. Add heavy armour, intense physical activity, and the stress of learning to kill, and many gladiators collapse from heat exhaustion during training. Those who fall are dragged to the side and doused with cold water, then forced to continue as soon as they regain consciousness. Weapon training follows conditioning. You're handed a wooden sword and taught the basic techniques of your assigned fighting style. If you're a secutor, you learn to fight with sword and shield against net-wielding retiarii. If you're a thraex, you master the curved sword and small shield. Each style has its own techniques, advantages and vulnerabilities, and your survival depends on mastering these differences. The wooden training weapons are deliberately heavier than real weapons, building strength while reducing the chance of fatal accidents during practice. But accidents still happen regularly. A misplaced thrust, a poorly executed parry, or a moment of inattention can result in serious injury or death, even with practice weapons. The trainers view these incidents as valuable learning experiences for the survivors. Combat training is conducted in pairs, with gladiators fighting against each other under constant supervision. The trainer watches every move, shouting corrections and insults in equal measure. A failed block earns you a painful blow from the trainer's stick. A successful attack is acknowledged with a grunt of approval. Gradually, you learn to read your opponent's movements, anticipate attacks, and find openings for counterstrikes. But training isn't just about individual combat skills. Gladiators must also learn to entertain crowds. You practice dramatic gestures, theatrical movements, and crowd-pleasing fighting styles that prioritize spectacle over efficiency. A quick, clean kill might end a fight, but it disappoints audiences who want to see extended combat with multiple wounds and dramatic reversals of fortune. The psychological aspect of training is perhaps the most difficult. You must learn to kill other human beings while maintaining enough control to follow the complex rules governing gladiatorial combat. Some fights are to the death, others end when one combatant is severely wounded. Learning to read these distinctions and respond appropriately requires splitting your attention between survival and showmanship. Injury is constant during training. Bruises, cuts, sprains, and broken bones are daily occurrences. Medical treatment is minimal. Wounds are cleaned with wine and bandaged with whatever cloth is available. Serious injuries that interfere with fighting ability often result in a gladiator being sold to cheaper schools or simply executed as worthless property. The training schedule is relentless. Morning conditioning, afternoon weapon practice, evening specialized drills, with only brief breaks for meals and rest. Your body never fully recovers from one session before the next begins. Chronic pain becomes normal, and you learn to fight through injuries that would incapacitate ordinary people. As weeks turn to months, you begin to understand the true horror of your situation. You're not just learning to fight, you're being systematically desensitized to violence and death. Each day makes it easier to hurt others, and harder to remember what you were like before this nightmare began. The training is transforming you into something no longer quite human. a living weapon designed solely for the entertainment of others, and through it all you know that no amount of training guarantees survival. The arena is unpredictable, and even the most skilled gladiators eventually meet opponents they cannot defeat. Inside the gladiator school, a brutal hierarchy determines who lives comfortably and who suffers. At the top are the veterini, gladiators who have survived numerous arena appearances and earned enough victories to gain privileges. These men eat better food, sleep in slightly more comfortable quarters, and often serve as informal leaders among the other fighters. Below the veterans are the ordinary gladiators, men with some experience who have proven they can survive in the arena, but haven't yet distinguished themselves enough to earn special treatment. They make up the majority of any gladiator school, and live in constant fear of being selected for particularly dangerous matches or being paired against superior opponents. At the bottom of the hierarchy are the novitius, new gladiators who haven't yet fought in the arena. These men are treated as completely expendable, given the worst food, the most dangerous training assignments, and the least attention from medical staff. Most novitius die within their first few arena appearances, and everyone knows it. The pecking order extends beyond simple experience levels. Gladiators who excel at particular fighting styles command respect and fear from others. A successful retiarius who has killed multiple opponents with his net, and trident becomes someone others avoid confronting. Similarly, heavily armoured secutoras who have proven their ability to withstand and deliver punishment earn grudging respect from fighters who rely more on speed and agility. Personal relationships within the school are complex and dangerous. Friendships can form between gladiators, but everyone understands that they might be forced to fight each other to the death at any moment. Some gladiators choose complete isolation, avoiding emotional connections that could be used against them. Others form alliances for mutual protection, sharing food and providing medical assistance to each other. Sexual relationships also develop within the confines of the school, though these carry additional risks. Gladiators caught in relationships might be deliberately paired against each other as a form of entertainment for crowds who enjoy the drama of forcing lovers to fight. The emotional trauma of killing someone you care about has driven many gladiators to madness or suicide. The guards and trainers maintain order through a system of rewards and punishments that keeps gladiators focused on survival rather than rebellion. Extra food, better sleeping arrangements, or advanced weapons training serve as incentives for good behaviour and superior performance. Punishments include reduced rations, assignment to more dangerous opponents, or physical beatings that leave lasting injuries. Violence between gladiators outside of formal training is theoretically forbidden, but it happens regularly. Disputes over food, sleeping space, or perceived slights can escalate into deadly confrontations. The staff generally allows these incidents to continue unless they threaten to disrupt training schedules or damage valuable property. Sometimes they even encourage conflicts, viewing them as additional training opportunities. Information becomes a valuable commodity within the school. Gladiators who learn details about upcoming matches, opponent weaknesses, or arena conditions can trade this knowledge for favours, protection, or better treatment. Conversely, spreading false information or withholding crucial details can result in social isolation or targeted harassment from other fighters. The psychological pressure of constantly living under threat of death creates various coping mechanisms among gladiators. Some become deeply religious, spending their free time in prayer or meditation. Others turn to dark humour, making jokes about death and violence as a way to process their situation. Many develop superstitious rituals they believe will protect them in combat. Mental illness is common among gladiators, but rarely acknowledged or treated. Men who begin talking to themselves, displaying paranoid behaviour, or showing signs of severe depression are usually viewed as liabilities rather than individuals needing help. Those whose mental state deteriorates too far are often assigned to obviously hopeless matches as a way of disposing of them. The constant stress of knowing you might die at any moment affects every aspect of daily life. Sleep becomes difficult when you're surrounded by other desperate men who might see you as a threat. Eating loses its pleasure when you realise each meal might be your last. Even simple conversations carry undertones of evaluation. Is this person someone who might help me survive, or someone who poses a danger? Leadership among gladiators is informal but crucial for survival. Respected veterans often take newer fighters under their protection, teaching them survival techniques and fighting strategies in exchange for loyalty and assistance. These mentor relationships can mean the difference between life and death for inexperienced gladiators, but they also create obligations that can become dangerous if mentors and protégés are forced to fight each other. This hierarchy isn't just about social status. It's a survival mechanism in an environment where human life has no inherent value, and death is a daily possibility. The gladiator diet is designed with one purpose: maintaining your body as an effective fighting machine while spending as little money as possible. Your meals consist primarily of barley, beans, and dried fruit, cheap, filling foods that provide basic nutrition without any consideration for taste or enjoyment. This diet has earned gladiators the nickname hordeari, or barley men, among the Roman population. Breakfast typically consists of barley porridge mixed with water or diluted wine. The porridge is often lumpy, poorly cooked, and sometimes spoiled, but you eat it anyway because refusing food means weakness, and weakness means death. Occasionally, pieces of stale bread or dried fruit are added to the porridge, but these additions are rare, and usually reserved for gladiators who have recently won arena victories. The midday meal brings more of the same: beans boiled with whatever vegetables are available and affordable. Onions, cabbage and turnips appear regularly, usually overcooked until they're nearly flavourless mush. Meat is extremely rare and appears only when an animal dies of natural causes or when a gladiator's performance has been particularly impressive. When meat is available, it's usually tough, gristly, and often partially spoiled. Water is the primary beverage, drawn from communal wells that serve the entire gladiator school. The water quality varies dramatically depending on the season and local conditions. During summer months, the water often becomes brackish and contaminated, leading to widespread illness among the gladiators. Diluted wine is sometimes provided, but it's usually so watered down that it provides little nutritional value or enjoyment. Medical care for gladiators exists solely to maintain their value as fighting assets. The school employs a medicus, usually a Greek slave with some medical training, whose job is to keep gladiators functional rather than healthy or comfortable. Treatment focuses on injuries that might prevent a gladiator from fighting, while chronic pain, minor illnesses, and psychological trauma are completely ignored. Wound treatment follows basic principles designed to prevent infection and promote healing, quickly enough to return gladiators to training. Fresh wounds are cleaned with wine or vinegar, which causes excruciating pain but helps prevent bacterial infection. Deep cuts are sewn shut with whatever thread is available, often horsehair or plant fibres that cause additional irritation and scarring. Broken bones present particular challenges for gladiator medicine. A broken arm or leg that heals improperly can end a gladiator's career, making him worthless property. The medicus attempts to set bones using wooden splints and tight bindings, but without proper understanding of anatomy or access to effective pain relief, many breaks heal incorrectly, leaving gladiators with permanent disabilities. Pain management is virtually non-existent. Gladiators are expected to fight through pain that would incapacitate ordinary people. The closest thing to pain relief comes from alcohol. Wine or beer provided in small quantities to help gladiators sleep despite their injuries. Some gladiators develop serious drinking problems as they attempt to self-medicate chronic pain and psychological trauma. Serious illnesses like fever, dysentery, or respiratory infections are treated with a combination of folk remedies and desperate hope. The medicus might prescribe various herbal concoctions, bloodletting with leeches, or induced vomiting to balance the humours. These treatments are based on superstition rather than medical knowledge, and often make patients sicker rather than promoting recovery. Dental care is non-existent. Gladiators' teeth rot from poor diet and lack of hygiene, leading to constant pain and recurring infections. Lost teeth are never replaced, and dental abscesses are allowed to develop until they either rupture on their own or kill the gladiator. The constant pain from dental problems affects gladiators' ability to eat, sleep, and concentrate during training. Hygiene standards are minimal and focused on preventing disease outbreaks, that could damage the entire gladiator population. Gladiators are required to bathe occasionally in communal pools filled with cold water. No soap is provided, and the same water is used by dozens of men, making the baths potential sources of infection rather than cleanliness. Preventive medicine consists mainly of identifying and isolating gladiators who show signs of contagious diseases. Anyone displaying symptoms of serious illness is immediately separated from the others and either treated aggressively or allowed to die to prevent spread to valuable fighters. This quarantine system helps protect the investment in trained gladiators, but provides no comfort to those who become ill. The psychological effects of poor medical care compound the physical problems gladiators face. Knowing that serious injury or illness likely means death creates constant anxiety that affects sleep, appetite, and mental stability. Many gladiators develop a fatalistic attitude about their health, accepting pain and illness as inevitable rather than seeking help that probably won't come. Veteran gladiators often become skilled at basic medical care through necessity, learning to clean and dress their own wounds, set simple fractures, and recognize signs of serious illness. This knowledge is shared informally among trusted fighters, creating a parallel medical system based on practical experience rather than formal training. This approach to diet and medical care reveals the fundamental truth about gladiatorial life. You are valuable property, not a human being, and your care reflects that reality. The night before your arena appearance, sleep becomes impossible. You lie on your straw mattress listening to the sounds of other gladiators, some praying quietly, others weeping, a few maintaining conversations that sound forced and artificial. Everyone knows that some of the voices they're hearing tonight will be silent forever by tomorrow evening. Dawn brings the final preparations. Guards arrive earlier than usual, calling out the names of gladiators scheduled to fight. Each name announcement creates a moment of relief for those not called, and fresh terror for those selected. You hear your name and feel your stomach drop, even though you've been expecting this day for weeks. Breakfast is different on arena days. Instead of the usual barley porridge, gladiators receive better food, meat, wine, and bread. This final meal isn't a kindness, it's an investment. Well-fed gladiators fight better and provide superior entertainment. You force yourself to eat despite having no appetite, knowing that hunger will be a disadvantage in combat. The preparation ritual begins with equipment selection. Your trainer examines various weapons and armor pieces, choosing gear based on your fighting style and the type of match you'll be fighting. The equipment is functional rather than decorative, designed to protect vital areas while still allowing opponents to inflict spectacular wounds that will satisfy the crowd's bloodlust. Putting on gladiator armor is a lengthy process that increases your anxiety with each piece. The leather and metal components are heavy, restricting movement and trapping heat against your body. The helmet limits your vision and hearing, making you feel isolated and vulnerable. Every piece of equipment reminds you that you're being prepared for potential death. The march to the arena is conducted under heavy guard. Gladiators are chained together to prevent escape attempts, though few would try to run even if given the opportunity. Where would you go? Escaped gladiators are hunted down ruthlessly, and recapture usually means immediate execution or assignment to the most hopeless matches available. As you approach the Colosseum or whatever arena will host the day's games, the noise becomes overwhelming. Thousands of spectators are already gathering, their excited chatter and laughter creating a din that grows louder as you get closer. These people see your potential death as entertainment, and their enthusiasm for violence is both terrifying and dehumanizing. Waiting beneath the arena in the Hypogeum is its own form of torture. The underground chambers are cramped, hot, and filled with the sounds of preparation. Animals roaring, weapons being sharpened, and other gladiators trying to cope with their fear in various ways. Some engage in frantic last-minute training, others sit in complete silence, and a few have nervous breakdowns that require restraint. The smell in the waiting area is overwhelming. Fear-induced sweat, animal waste, blood from previous events, and the lingering odour of death from gladiators who died in recent games combine to create an atmosphere that makes breathing difficult. Many gladiators vomit from anxiety, adding to the nauseating environment. Finally, your turn arrives. The gate opens and bright sunlight floods in, temporarily blinding you after the darkness of the underground chambers. The roar of the crowd hits you like a physical force. Tens of thousands of voices screaming for blood and death. You step onto the arena sand, feeling its rough texture beneath your feet, and knowing that this sand has absorbed the blood of countless previous fighters. The arena itself is vast and intimidating. The high walls prevent escape, and the crowd towers above you on all sides, their faces twisted with excitement and bloodlust. You scan the audience briefly and see well-dressed Romans eating, drinking, and placing bets on whether you'll survive the next few minutes. Your opponent enters from the opposite gate, and you size each other up across the sand. He might be someone you've trained with, eaten with, or even considered a friend. But now you're enemies, and only one of you is likely to leave the arena alive. The crowd's noise intensifies as they anticipate the violence about to unfold. The referee signals the beginning of combat, and everything you've learned in training must now be applied under the most stressful conditions imaginable. Every move could be your last. Every decision might determine whether you survive or die for the entertainment of people who see you as less than human. This is Arena Day, when your life becomes a spectacle, and your death becomes entertainment for those who will never face the dangers you're experiencing. Your survival in the arena depends on mastering combat techniques that balance effectiveness with entertainment value. Unlike military combat, gladiatorial fighting must provide spectacle for the crowd, while still allowing you to defend your life against opponents who are equally desperate to survive. The basic principle of gladiatorial combat is controlled aggression. You must be aggressive enough to defeat your opponent, but controlled enough to avoid unnecessary risks that could get you killed. This requires split-second decision-making under extreme stress, with thousands of people screaming for your blood while you try to focus on staying alive. Footwork forms the foundation of all gladiatorial combat techniques. The arena sand is unpredictable, sometimes loose and shifting, other times packed hard, often mixed with blood that makes footing treacherous. You learn to move with small controlled steps that maintain balance while allowing quick directional changes. Poor footwork in the arena means death, as a single stumble can give your opponent the opening needed for a killing blow. Distance management becomes crucial when fighting with weapons that have different reach advantages. If you're armed with a short sword and shield facing an opponent with a trident and net, you must constantly work to close distance while avoiding the longer weapon. Conversely, if you have the reach advantage, you must maintain distance while looking for opportunities to land decisive strikes. Reading your opponent's intentions requires observing subtle cues that indicate their next move. The way an opponent shifts weight, adjusts grip, or changes breathing patterns can telegraph their attacks if you're trained to recognize these signs. Veterans develop almost supernatural ability to anticipate attacks, but this skill comes only after surviving numerous life-or-death encounters. Defensive techniques in gladiatorial combat differ significantly from military fighting. Your goal isn't just to avoid death, you must also create opportunities for counterattacks while providing entertainment for the crowd. This means sometimes taking calculated risks that a soldier would never accept, such as allowing minor wounds in order to land more spectacular attacks. Shield work varies dramatically depending on your fighting style. A secutor with a large rectangular shield uses it primarily for protection, creating a mobile wall that can absorb multiple attacks while looking for openings. A Thraex with a small round shield must use it more actively, deflecting attacks and creating openings through precise timing rather than brute defense. Weapon techniques are specialized according to your assigned fighting style. Sword work emphasizes quick, precise cuts rather than powerful slashing attacks. The goal is to inflict wounds that will disable your opponent or cause them to bleed heavily enough to weaken them over time. Clean quick kills are discouraged because they end the entertainment too quickly. The psychology of combat plays an enormous role in gladiatorial success. You must project confidence and aggression even when you're terrified and exhausted. Opponents who sense fear or weakness will press their attacks more aggressively, while those who perceive you as dangerous might become more cautious and defensive. Crowd management becomes part of your combat strategy. Gladiators who can engage the audience often receive more favourable treatment from referees and may be spared even if they lose their matches. This requires fighting in a style that emphasises dramatic gestures, spectacular attacks, and theatrical responses to wounds that demonstrate both courage and entertainment value. Improvisation skills are essential because arena conditions are never identical to training scenarios. Equipment might break during combat. Environmental factors like sun glare or wind can affect visibility and balance, and opponents might employ unexpected tactics that require immediate adaptation. Rigid adherence to trained techniques can get you killed when circumstances change rapidly. Endurance management involves pacing yourself through potentially lengthy combats while maintaining the energy needed for decisive moments. Fighting at maximum intensity from the beginning of a match often results in exhaustion that allows opponents to win through persistence rather than skill. Learning to conserve energy while still appearing aggressive requires experience that many gladiators don't live long enough to develop. Wound management during combat means continuing to fight effectively, even after receiving injuries that would incapacitate ordinary people. Gladiators learn to ignore pain, compensate for reduced mobility, and use adrenaline to maintain combat effectiveness even with serious wounds. The ability to fight through injury often determines who survives when both combatants are wounded. Recovery techniques help you regain advantage after being knocked down or temporarily overwhelmed. Rolling away from follow-up attacks, using your shield to create space, or even temporarily retreating to recover balance and assess the situation can prevent minor setbacks from becoming fatal disadvantages. Finishing techniques are employed when your opponent is defeated but still alive. The crowd's reaction determines whether you deliver a killing blow or spare your opponent's life. Reading the crowd's mood and responding appropriately can affect your own future treatment and survival prospects. These combat techniques represent the difference between quick death and potential survival, in an environment where your life depends entirely on your ability to entertain others with violence. The Roman crowd in the amphitheatre holds absolute power over your fate. Their cheers can save your life, their disapproval can sentence you to death, and their mood changes as quickly and unpredictably as a summer storm. Understanding crowd psychology becomes as important as mastering weapons if you want to survive as a gladiator. The audience arrives with specific expectations based on the type of games being presented. Morning executions create a bloodthirsty atmosphere where crowds expect to see criminals torn apart by wild animals or executed in elaborate stage scenarios. By the time gladiatorial combats begin in the afternoon, spectators have been conditioned to expect violence and are primed for excitement. The progression from morning animal hunts to midday executions builds an escalating appetite for death that reaches its peak when gladiators finally enter the arena. Different sections of the arena contain different types of spectators with varying levels of influence over your fate. The emperor, if present, sits in the imperial box and his opinion carries ultimate authority. A simple gesture from Caesar can override thousands of screaming voices, making imperial favour the most valuable commodity a gladiator can possess. Senators and wealthy patricians occupy the best seats, and their collective approval or disapproval influences the final decision about defeated gladiators. These men often have financial interests in gladiator schools, and their business calculations affect mercy decisions as much as entertainment preferences. Common citizens fill the upper levels and express their opinions through volume rather than political influence. Their collective roar can create momentum that influences more powerful spectators, but they rarely have direct impact on life or death decisions. The poorest Romans stand in the highest sections, so far from the action that they rely on rumours and speculation about what's happening below. Their bloodlust often exceeds that of closer spectators because distance makes the violence seem less real and more like theatrical performance. Crowd preferences for fighting styles vary based on current fashions and recent memorable performances. A spectacular victory by a retiarius might make net fighters popular for weeks, while a particularly brutal defeat could turn audiences against certain combat styles. Successful gladiators learn to read these trends and adapt their performance accordingly. Fighting in an unpopular style can mean facing hostile crowds regardless of your skill level, while popular styles receive more generous treatment even from mediocre performers. The social dynamics within the crowd affect their reactions to individual gladiators. Spectators often develop favourites based on previous performances, physical appearance, or fighting style preferences. These fan relationships can provide protection. Crowds are more likely to spare popular gladiators who suffer defeats, while unknown or disliked fighters face death even for minor failures. Some gladiators cultivate specific personas to appeal to different audience segments, playing up regional origins, physical characteristics, or fighting techniques that resonate with particular social groups. Betting heavily influences crowd behaviour throughout the empire. Romans wager enormous sums on gladiatorial combats, and financial interest can override entertainment preferences. Spectators who have bet on your victory will cheer your success enthusiastically, while those who wagered against you might call for your death even if you fight well. Professional gamblers attend games primarily to protect their investments, creating organised cheering sections that can manipulate crowd reactions. The betting odds themselves become part of the entertainment, with popular gladiators facing additional pressure to justify the confidence placed in them. Gender dynamics within the audience create additional complexities that gladiators must navigate carefully. Roman women often attend gladiatorial games, and their reactions can be particularly influential, especially among the upper classes where female opinion carries social weight. Some women become obsessed with specific gladiators, viewing them as romantic figures despite their slave status. These female fans often provide the most passionate support, but also the most vicious condemnation when their favourites disappoint them. Other women express bloodlust that exceeds their male counterparts, demanding increasingly violent spectacles as proof of their sophistication and worldliness. These female spectators often call for death more readily than men, perhaps to demonstrate that their delicate appearance doesn't reflect weakness or squeamishness. The presence of children in the audience adds another layer of complexity, as parents use gladiatorial violence to teach lessons about courage, honour, and the consequences of failure. The timing of your performance within the day's schedule affects crowd reactions in predictable patterns. Early afternoon fights face audiences that are fresh and attentive, more likely to appreciate technical skill and tactical innovation. These crowds haven't yet been desensitized by hours of violence and might show greater appreciation for defensive techniques and strategic thinking. Midday contests benefit from peak attendance and energy levels, creating the most responsive and engaged audiences. Later contests must compete with spectator fatigue, alcohol consumption, and diminished attention spans. Fighting at the end of a long day means performing for crowds that have become jaded and require more extreme violence to maintain their interest. These tired audiences demand quick resolutions and dramatic gestures, punishing gladiators who attempt subtle or defensive fighting styles. The accumulated heat, noise, and bloodshed of the day creates an atmosphere where only the most spectacular performances can capture attention. Weather conditions influence crowd mood significantly in ways that can determine your survival. Hot weather makes spectators irritable and more likely to demand quick, decisive action rather than lengthy tactical fights. The combination of heat, crowded conditions, and hours of sitting on stone seats creates physical discomfort that audiences often express through increased bloodlust. Spectators want their entertainment to end quickly so they can seek relief from the oppressive conditions. Rain can dampen enthusiasm and create pressure for abbreviated contests that allow people to seek shelter. Wet conditions make footing treacherous and reduce the quality of combat, leading to more accidents and less skilled performances. Perfect weather conditions generally produce the most favourable audience reactions, creating comfortable environments where crowds can focus on entertainment rather than their own discomfort. Economic factors within the broader population affect crowd expectations in ways gladiators rarely understand. During periods of prosperity, audiences might be more generous in their judgments and willing to spare defeated gladiators. When people feel secure about their own futures, they can afford to show mercy to others. Economic hardship often correlates with increased bloodlust, as crowds seek violent entertainment to distract from their own problems. Spectators facing unemployment, food shortages, or political uncertainty demand compensation through spectacular violence that makes their own struggles seem manageable by comparison. Political tensions can spill over into arena reactions, turning gladiatorial contests into outlets for broader social frustrations. Crowds might use gladiatorial contests to express approval or disapproval of imperial policies, with their treatment of fighters serving as indirect commentary on larger political issues. Gladiators can become unwitting symbols in political disputes they know nothing about, facing death or mercy based on factors completely unrelated to their performance or character. Regional and ethnic characteristics of gladiators often trigger political responses from audiences. A Gallic fighter might face hostility during periods of trouble on the northern frontier, while Eastern gladiators could suffer during conflicts with Parthia. These political undercurrents create additional dangers that successful gladiators must learn to recognize and navigate. The role of professional entertainers within the crowd should not be underestimated by anyone seeking to survive the arena. Paid claques, groups hired to cheer or boo specific gladiators, can influence the reactions of genuine spectators through coordinated responses that create artificial momentum. These manipulated responses can affect the ultimate fate of fighters who don't realize their audience reactions are being orchestrated by people with financial interest in the outcomes. Claque leaders study crowd psychology and use sophisticated techniques to guide audience emotions. They plant supporters throughout different seating sections, coordinate chants and gestures, and time their interventions to maximize impact on spontaneous crowd reactions. Some gladiator schools employ their own claques to protect valuable fighters, while rival schools might hire competing groups to sabotage opponents. Regional preferences vary dramatically between different cities and amphitheatres throughout the empire. Roman crowds have different expectations than those in provincial cities, and gladiators who succeed in one location might fail disastrously in another, simply due to local tastes in entertainment and violence. Provincial audiences often prefer more brutal, straightforward combat, while sophisticated Roman spectators might appreciate technical innovation and tactical complexity. Some cities develop reputations for particularly bloodthirsty crowds that demand higher death tolls, while others become known for appreciating skill over spectacle. Successful gladiators learn to research local preferences and adjust their fighting styles accordingly, understanding that survival techniques that work in Rome might prove fatal in Alexandria or Antioch. The education level and sophistication of audiences affects their appreciation for technical fighting skills versus pure spectacle. More knowledgeable crowds might appreciate subtle tactical maneuvers and defensive techniques, recognizing the skill required for effective shield work, distance management, and counter-attacking. These audiences understand that flashy offensive techniques often leave fighters vulnerable, and respect gladiators who prioritize survival over dramatic gestures. Less sophisticated audiences demand obvious displays of aggression and dramatic gestures that clearly demonstrate dominance and superiority. These crowds interpret defensive fighting as cowardice and punish gladiators who don't provide the simple narrative of strong defeating weak that they expect from their entertainment. Religious festivals and holidays influence crowd expectations in ways that can dramatically affect gladiator survival rates. Certain occasions call for more elaborate spectacles with higher death tolls to satisfy religious requirements or ceremonial traditions. Understanding these ceremonial contexts helps gladiators calibrate their performances appropriately, knowing when mercy is likely and when religious obligations demand blood sacrifice. Some festivals celebrate military victories and demand reenactments of famous battles with predetermined outcomes. Others honour specific gods who require particular types of offerings, creating situations where gladiator deaths serve religious rather than entertainment purposes. The presence of visiting dignitaries or foreign ambassadors can alter crowd behaviour as Romans attempt to project specific images of their civilization to international audiences. These occasions might favour displays of mercy and civilization over pure bloodlust, or conversely might demand particularly impressive demonstrations of Roman power and spectacle. Gladiators performing during diplomatic events face additional pressure to represent Roman values while providing entertainment that reflects well on imperial culture. Ultimately, your survival depends on your ability to read and respond to this complex, ever-changing audience whose approval means life and whose disapproval means death. The crowd's power is absolute, their judgment is final, and their mood determines whether you see another sunrise or join the countless gladiators whose blood has already stained the arena sand. The end of gladiatorial combat brings the most crucial moment of your existence, when the crowd and officials determine whether you live or die. Victory doesn't guarantee survival, and defeat doesn't necessarily mean death. But the next few seconds will determine whether you see another sunrise or join the countless gladiators whose blood has stained the arena sand. If you emerge victorious, your first responsibility is acknowledging the crowd's role in your success. Experienced gladiators raise their weapons toward the imperial box and the audience, demonstrating gratitude for their approval. This gesture isn't mere courtesy. It's a survival technique that encourages future support from spectators who appreciate recognition of their importance. The salute must appear genuine and heartfelt, as crowds can detect false gratitude and punish insincere performers with reduced support in future contests. The victor's celebration must be carefully calibrated to match crowd expectations and the specific circumstances of victory. Too little enthusiasm suggests ingratitude or lack of appreciation for the crowd's support, potentially alienating spectators who want their entertainment to include dramatic emotional displays. Too much celebration can appear arrogant or disrespectful to your defeated opponent, potentially turning audience approval into disapproval if they perceive you as lacking proper dignity or compassion. Successful gladiators develop an intuitive sense for the appropriate level of victory demonstration based on crowd reactions and the specific circumstances of their win. A hard-fought victory over a respected opponent calls for restrained celebration that honours the fallen fighter, while defeating a despised enemy might justify more enthusiastic displays. Reading these subtle social cues can mean the difference between building long-term fan support and creating enemies who will call for your death in future contests. Prize money and gifts await successful gladiators, but these rewards come with their own complications that can create new dangers. A purse of gold coins represents freedom from immediate financial desperation, but it also makes you a target for theft from other gladiators, or corrupt officials who see your winnings as opportunities for easy profit. Storing and protecting prize money requires constant vigilance in an environment where everyone around you faces potential death and desperate circumstances. Weapons or armour given as prizes might be superior to your standard equipment, but they also require adjustment and practice to use effectively. New gear can provide significant advantages in future fights, but the transition period while learning to use unfamiliar equipment creates vulnerability that opponents might exploit. Some gladiators prefer to sell prize equipment and keep their familiar weapons rather than risk the adjustment period that new gear requires. For the defeated gladiator, the moments after losing represent either salvation or doom depending on crowd reaction and official judgment. If conscious and able to move, you must appeal to the crowd for mercy through your behaviour and bearing during these crucial seconds. Displaying courage in defeat, accepting responsibility for your loss, and showing respect for your opponent can influence spectators to grant missio, the sparing of your life that represents your only hope for survival. The appeal for mercy requires perfect timing and execution, as you have only moments to demonstrate the qualities that might convince audiences to spare you. Crawling or begging appears cowardly and usually results in death, while maintaining dignity despite defeat can earn respect that translates into survival. Some defeated gladiators achieve legendary status through their graceful acceptance of defeat, becoming crowd favourites who enjoy protection in future contests. The famous thumbs up or down gesture is more complex than popular imagination suggests, involving multiple signals and sources of authority that collectively determine your fate. Crowd reactions involve shouting, waving cloths, and various hand gestures that collectively indicate their judgment about whether you deserve to live or die. The noise level alone can influence officials, as overwhelming support for mercy creates pressure to spare defeated gladiators regardless of other considerations. The final decision rests with the sponsor of the games, usually a wealthy politician or the emperor himself, who is influenced by but not bound by crowd opinion. These officials must balance entertainment value, crowd satisfaction, economic considerations and political implications when deciding the fate of defeated gladiators. A sponsor who consistently ignores crowd wishes risks unpopularity, while one who shows too much mercy might be seen as weak or wasteful. Physical condition affects your chances of survival if defeated, with medical and economic calculations playing major roles in mercy decisions. Gladiators who are merely exhausted or lightly wounded often receive mercy because they represent recoverable investments that can provide future entertainment value. Those with severe injuries that would prevent future fighting are more likely to be executed because they've become worthless property that will only generate medical expenses without producing revenue. The economic calculation is simple but brutal. Wounded gladiators who can recover represent future investment returns, while permanently disabled fighters become worthless expenses that drain resources without providing benefits. Officials evaluating mercy requests consider healing time, medical costs, and the likelihood of successful return to competition when making their decisions. The manner of your defeat influences crowd reaction significantly, often determining whether you receive mercy regardless of your injuries or previous reputation. Losing after a brave, skillful fight that provided good entertainment often results in mercy, as crowds appreciate gladiators who fulfill their part of the entertainment bargain even in defeat. These crowds recognize that excellent contests require skilled opponents on both sides and reward participants who contribute to memorable spectacles. Defeat due to obvious cowardice, poor technique, or failure to provide adequate spectacle usually means death regardless of your injuries or previous reputation. Crowds punish gladiators who disappoint them by providing boring or incompetent performances, viewing execution as appropriate punishment for failing to meet entertainment expectations. This creates additional pressure on gladiators to maintain performance standards even when facing superior opponents or unfavourable circumstances. Religious and ceremonial considerations sometimes override practical concerns about gladiator survival, creating situations where individual merit becomes irrelevant. Certain festivals or occasions demand specific numbers of deaths to satisfy religious requirements or political expectations established by tradition or imperial decree. During these events, some gladiators must die regardless of their performance quality or crowd appeal because the ceremony requires blood sacrifice to maintain its sacred significance. Individual merit becomes irrelevant when larger ceremonial needs determine how many gladiators must die to satisfy religious or political requirements. These predetermined death quotas create situations where excellent gladiators face execution simply because they happen to fight during events that require specific numbers of fatalities. Understanding the ceremonial calendar becomes crucial for gladiators seeking to avoid contest where survival is impossible regardless of performance. For those granted missio, the relief is overwhelming but temporary, creating a complex mixture of gratitude and renewed anxiety. Surviving one contest only means facing the uncertainty of future matches with no guarantee that mercy will be extended again. Each survival creates both gratitude for continued life and dread about upcoming contests that might not end as favourably. The psychological burden of knowing that death has been postponed rather than avoided can be almost as difficult to bear as the original fear of execution. Each survival creates both gratitude and dread. You're alive today, but tomorrow might bring an opponent you cannot defeat or a crowd less inclined toward mercy. The temporary nature of survival creates ongoing stress that affects sleep, appetite, and mental stability. Some gladiators find that repeated brushes with death become more difficult to handle over time, as the accumulated psychological trauma makes each new contest more terrifying than the last. The execution of defeated gladiators follows established protocols designed to maintain dignity while satisfying crowd bloodlust and providing educational examples for surviving fighters. The victor typically delivers the killing blow, usually a thrust to the throat or heart that brings quick death, and demonstrates proper technique to watching gladiators. This final act requires precise technique and emotional control, as bungled executions that prolong suffering can turn crowd approval into angry disapproval. A bungled execution that prolongs suffering can turn crowd approval into angry disapproval, damaging the victor's reputation and future prospects. Gladiators must learn to kill efficiently and humanely, even in moments of triumph, demonstrating professional competence and emotional control that crowds expect from experienced fighters. The ability to grant quick, clean death becomes a mark of skill that enhances a gladiator's reputation and increases chances of mercy if roles are reversed in future contests. Recovery from victory involves its own challenges that can affect future performance and survival prospects. Adrenaline that sustained you through combat dissipates rapidly, leaving you exhausted and often in significant pain from wounds you didn't notice during fighting. The post-combat crash can be severe, with some gladiators collapsing from delayed shock or previously ignored injuries that become incapacitating once the immediate danger passes. Medical attention focuses exclusively on injuries that might affect future performance, while minor wounds are expected to heal on their own, regardless of discomfort or potential complications. Gladiator medicine prioritizes return to fighting condition over comfort or long-term health, creating situations where undertreated injuries become chronic problems that eventually end careers or lives. The psychological aftermath of killing another human being affects gladiators differently, depending on their background, personality, and previous experience with violence. Some become hardened to violence and death, viewing each kill as a necessary step towards survival and potential freedom. These gladiators develop emotional numbness that protects them from trauma, but also isolates them from normal human relationships and emotional connections. Others suffer psychological trauma that manifests as nightmares, anxiety, or depression that can impair future performance and survival chances. These emotional wounds often prove more difficult to treat than physical injuries, as gladiator schools lack understanding of mental health and view psychological problems as weakness rather than treatable conditions. Some gladiators develop drinking problems or other destructive behaviours as they attempt to cope with trauma from repeated violence. Social dynamics within the gladiator school shift after arena appearances, creating new hierarchies and relationships based on recent performance. Survivors gain respect and status among their peers, earning better treatment and increased influence in school politics. Their experience and proven survival skills make them valuable mentors for newer gladiators, but also create expectations for continued success that add pressure to future performances. Meanwhile, their defeated opponents are quickly forgotten, as the constant turnover of personnel prevents the formation of deep relationships and reinforces the reality that every gladiator is ultimately alone in their struggle for survival. The rapid replacement of dead fighters with new recruits creates an environment where building lasting friendships becomes emotionally dangerous and potentially counterproductive. Victory celebrations within the school are muted affairs that reflect the somber reality of gladiatorial life. While successful gladiators might receive better food or small privileges as rewards for their success, excessive celebration is discouraged as it reminds everyone that survival comes at the cost of other men's lives. The atmosphere remains somber even in success, as all gladiators understand that their turn as the defeated might come next, making triumph feel temporary and precarious. The constant awareness of mortality prevents genuine celebration and creates an environment where even success feels hollow and temporary. Gladiators learn to appreciate victories quietly and privately, understanding that their survival has cost others their lives and that fortune can change quickly in future contests. Record-keeping tracks each gladiator's performance meticulously for future matchmaking and investment decisions that determine career trajectories. Officials note fighting style effectiveness, crowd appeal, injury patterns, and psychological resilience in detailed files that follow gladiators throughout their careers. This data determines future opponents, equipment assignments, and ultimately the gladiators' long-term survival prospects as managers calculate optimal ways to extract maximum entertainment value from their human property. These records become crucial factors in determining who faces whom, what equipment they receive, and how often they fight. Gladiators with strong records might face more challenging opponents, but also receive better equipment and medical care, while those with poor performance histories often find themselves assigned to hopeless matches with inadequate gear, as their owners attempt to dispose of unprofitable assets, while extracting final entertainment value. The periods between arena appearances create their own form of psychological torture that many gladiators find more difficult to endure than actual combat. Unlike the immediate terror of fighting for your life, the waiting involves prolonged anxiety that slowly erodes mental stability and physical health over weeks or months of uncertainty. You never know when your next fight will come, who your opponent will be, or whether you'll survive the encounter that could arrive tomorrow or might be delayed for seasons. Daily routines between fights follow strict schedules designed to maintain physical conditioning, while preventing gladiators from dwelling too deeply on their circumstances or developing the kind of despair that leads to suicide or rebellion. Dawn brings the same brutal training sessions regardless of injuries from previous fights or the mental exhaustion that comes from constant stress. Sword work, conditioning exercises, and tactical drills continue relentlessly, preparing you for battles that may never come or might arrive with only hours of notice. The training during waiting periods becomes more intense and desperate as gladiators attempt to improve their chances of survival in future contests. Veterans share techniques and strategies with newer fighters, creating informal mentorship relationships that provide emotional support while building practical skills. These teaching sessions often occur during rest periods or meals, as gladiators use every available moment to prepare for upcoming challenges. The uncertainty creates various coping mechanisms among gladiators, each reflecting different personality types and backgrounds. Some become obsessively religious, spending every free moment in prayer or meditation as they seek divine protection from dangers they cannot control through physical preparation alone. These gladiators often create elaborate ritual practices, making offerings to specific gods or following superstitious routines they believe will influence their fate in future contests. Others develop complex superstitious rituals they believe will protect them in future fights, such as wearing specific items of clothing, eating particular foods, or performing detailed pre-combat ceremonies. These superstitions provide psychological comfort by creating an illusion of control over circumstances that are actually determined by factors completely beyond gladiator influence. The rituals become obsessive behaviors that help manage anxiety, while providing structure during periods of enforced inactivity. Many gladiators simply become numb to their situation, existing day to day without hope or expectation beyond basic survival. This emotional shutdown protects them from the constant stress of anticipating death, but also disconnects them from positive experiences and relationships that might provide comfort during difficult periods. These psychologically numbed gladiators often perform adequately in combat, but lack the passion and drive that sometimes allows exceptional fighters to achieve freedom or lasting success. Injuries from previous fights rarely heal completely before new training injuries are added to the accumulating damage. Chronic pain becomes normal, and gladiators learn to function with physical limitations that would disable ordinary people. Partial healing leaves scars, stiff joints, and persistent aches that serve as constant reminders of past battles and warnings of future conflicts that will add additional damage to already compromised bodies. The inadequate medical care during recovery periods means that minor injuries often become major problems through neglect or improper treatment. Simple cuts become infected, sprains develop into permanent joint damage, and concussions go untreated until they cause lasting neurological problems. Gladiators learn to hide injuries and pain to avoid being seen as damaged goods who might be disposed of rather than treated. Social relationships within the school are complicated by the knowledge that friends might be forced to fight each other in future contests. Some gladiators maintain emotional distance from everyone, protecting themselves from the trauma of potentially killing people they care about. This isolation provides psychological protection, but also eliminates sources of emotional support that could help them cope with the stress of gladiatorial life. Others form intense bonds that make potential future conflicts even more traumatic when they occur. These close relationships provide crucial emotional support during difficult periods, but create additional psychological burdens when gladiators must face the possibility of fighting friends or watching people they care about die in the arena. The stronger the friendship, the more devastating it becomes when circumstances force conflict. These relationships are further complicated by the constant arrival of new fighters and disappearance of others through death or manumission. The frequent turnover makes it difficult to form lasting bonds while constantly reminding gladiators of their own mortality. New arrivals bring fresh perspectives and news from the outside world, but they also represent replacements for friends who have been lost to the arena. Letters from family members, when they arrive, create emotional turmoil that can be worse than receiving no communication at all. Learning about births, deaths, marriages, and other life events in the outside world emphasizes how completely separated you are from normal human existence, and how unlikely it is that you'll ever return to participate in ordinary family relationships. These communications often increase depression and hopelessness rather than providing comfort. Some gladiators asked friends to intercept their mail to avoid this additional psychological burden, preferring ignorance about external events to the pain of knowing about a world they can no longer participate in. Others treasure every piece of news from home, using family connections as motivation to survive and potentially earn freedom that would allow reunion with loved ones. Economic calculations dominate every aspect of gladiator management during waiting periods, as officials constantly evaluate each fighter's potential profitability. They consider factors like crowd appeal, fighting ability, training costs, and medical expenses when making decisions about future matches and career management. Gladiators who become too expensive to maintain face assignment to hopeless matches designed to eliminate them while providing minimal entertainment value. These financial considerations often override merit or performance quality when officials make decisions about gladiator careers. A skilled fighter who requires expensive medical treatment might be disposed of, while a less talented but healthier gladiator receives better opportunities. Understanding these economic realities helps some gladiators make strategic decisions about when to reveal injuries or request medical attention. Seasonal variations affect training schedules and psychological states in predictable patterns that gladiators learn to anticipate and prepare for. Winter months bring relief from the intense heat that makes training unbearable during summer, but also create depression and cabin fever from confinement in cramped quarters with inadequate lighting and ventilation. The shortened days and limited outdoor time during winter often lead to increased conflict between gladiators and higher rates of illness and injury. Spring and summer increase the frequency of games and the likelihood of being selected for matches, creating constant tension as fighting season approaches. The knowledge that arena activity increases during warmer months makes every seasonal change a reminder of approaching danger and uncertainty. Gladiators often develop seasonal mood disorders that affect their training performance and mental stability. Dreams become a refuge for many gladiators, offering temporary escape from their reality through sleep and fantasy. But even sleep provides no real relief, as nightmares about past and future fights frequently interrupt rest and prevent the psychological recovery that sleep should provide. Many gladiators develop chronic insomnia, creating additional physical and mental deterioration that affects their fighting ability and survival prospects. The nightmares often feature realistic combat scenarios that cause gladiators to wake up exhausted from fighting imaginary battles all night. Some develop sleep disorders that make them afraid to sleep, leading to chronic fatigue that compromises their physical condition and mental alertness. The lack of proper rest becomes another factor that reduces survival chances in an environment where any weakness can prove fatal. The arrival of new gladiators serves as a constant reminder of the various paths that lead to the arena and the diverse backgrounds of people who end up facing death for entertainment. War captives, criminals, volunteers seeking glory or money, and debtors sold to pay obligations all end up in the same situation regardless of how they arrived. These newcomers provide fresh perspectives on the outside world while highlighting how narrow the chances of ever returning to it really are. New arrivals often bring news about political events, social changes and economic conditions in the broader world, helping veteran gladiators understand the context of their situation and the factors that might affect their future prospects. However, this information also emphasizes how disconnected gladiators have become from normal society, and how difficult reintegration would be, even if they achieved freedom. Veteran gladiators often serve as informal mentors to newer fighters, sharing survival techniques and fighting strategies that could mean the difference between life and death in upcoming contests. But this teaching relationship is complicated by the knowledge that successful students might eventually become dangerous opponents in future matches. The balance between helping others survive and protecting your own interests creates constant ethical dilemmas that add to the psychological stress of gladiatorial life. Some veterans withhold crucial information or teach flawed techniques to maintain competitive advantages over potential future opponents. Others share knowledge freely, believing that improving overall skill levels benefits everyone by creating better contests that are more likely to result in mercy for defeated fighters. These different approaches create tensions within gladiator communities and affect the relationships between fighters of different experience levels. Mental exercises become crucial for maintaining sanity during long periods of enforced inactivity, when physical training isn't sufficient to occupy minds that naturally focus on survival concerns. Some gladiators create elaborate fantasy scenarios where they achieve freedom and return to normal lives, imagining detailed futures that help them endure present hardships. These mental escapes provide psychological relief, but can also increase depression when reality intrudes. Others focus on tactical planning, mentally rehearsing fighting techniques, and developing strategies for hypothetical opponents they might face in future contests. These mental training sessions help maintain combat readiness while providing purposeful activity during idle periods. The mental preparation often proves as valuable as physical training when gladiators enter actual combat situations. Food becomes one of the few pleasures available during waiting periods, even though gladiator meals are deliberately bland and repetitive to minimize costs and prevent fighters from becoming soft or distracted by luxury. The anticipation of meals provides structure to otherwise empty days, and sharing food becomes one of the few ways gladiators can express friendship and solidarity with each other, without risking the complications that deeper emotional bonds might create. Some gladiators develop elaborate rituals around eating, using mealtimes as opportunities for social interaction and mutual support. Others become obsessive about food, hoarding scraps or trading portions as they attempt to exert control over one of the few aspects of their lives that they can influence. The communal nature of meals forces interaction between gladiators who might otherwise isolate themselves completely. Physical maintenance requires constant attention during periods between fights, as weapons and equipment must be kept in perfect condition for sudden arena assignments. Weapons must be cleaned and sharpened regularly to prevent rust and maintain optimal performance characteristics. Armour requires frequent cleaning, adjustment and repair to ensure proper protection and mobility during combat. These activities provide purposeful work that helps pass time while ensuring readiness for sudden arena assignments that could come with little warning. The maintenance tasks also serve as meditation and stress relief, giving gladiators productive activities that contribute directly to their survival prospects. Some gladiators become obsessive about equipment care, using these tasks as ways to manage anxiety and maintain focus during difficult periods. The psychological pressure of waiting often proves more destructive than actual combat for many gladiators who find uncertainty more difficult to handle than immediate physical danger. While fights bring terror and pain, they also provide resolution and the possibility of advancement through victory. Waiting offers only uncertainty and gradual deterioration of hope, creating a form of prolonged torture that breaks men's spirits even when their bodies remain capable of fighting. This psychological deterioration can be more damaging to long-term survival prospects than physical injuries, as mental instability affects decision-making, reaction time, and tactical thinking during combat. Gladiators who enter contests with compromised mental states often make mistakes that lead to defeat and death, even when their physical conditioning and technical skills remain adequate for survival. For gladiators trapped in the brutal cycle of training and combat, only two paths lead away from the arena: death or manumission. Both destinations seem equally distant and unlikely when you're trapped in the daily routine of preparing for violence, but they represent the only possible endings to gladiatorial careers that could otherwise continue indefinitely until age or injury makes further fighting impossible. Death comes in various forms within the gladiatorial system, each carrying different implications for how gladiators are remembered and how their deaths affect surviving fighters. Most obviously, you might die in the arena during combat, providing entertainment for crowds who view your final moments as the climax of their afternoon's amusement. These public deaths receive the most attention and recognition, sometimes earning fallen gladiators legendary status if their final performances demonstrate exceptional courage or skill. But death also stalks gladiators outside the arena through training accidents, untreated injuries, disease, suicide, and simple exhaustion from the physical and psychological demands of constant preparation for violence. These private deaths receive no recognition or commemoration, as gladiators who die away from public view are simply disposed of as failed investments, rather than honoured as entertainers who fulfilled their purpose. Training accidents occur regularly due to the dangerous nature of weapons practice and conditioning exercises. Gladiators practicing with real weapons sometimes suffer fatal wounds from sparring partners who lose control or make mistakes during intense sessions. The use of heavy equipment and demanding physical exercises also creates opportunities for crushing injuries, falls, and other accidents that can kill fighters before they ever reach the arena. Combat deaths in the arena follow established protocols that reflect Roman values about courage and dignity, while serving the practical purpose of providing educational examples for surviving gladiators. A gladiator who accepts defeat and death with composure earns respect from crowds and fellow fighters alike, creating a model of honourable behaviour that others are expected to emulate. These dignified deaths sometimes earn posthumous recognition and serve as inspiration for other fighters facing similar circumstances. Conversely, those who beg for mercy, attempt to flee, or display cowardice in their final moments face additional humiliation that serves as a warning to other gladiators about the consequences of failing to meet expected standards of behaviour. These shameful deaths are quickly forgotten and deliberately excluded from the heroic narratives that gladiator schools use to motivate current fighters. The disposal of gladiator corpses reveals the complete lack of value placed on their lives once their entertainment potential has been exhausted. Bodies are dragged from the arena sand by slaves using hooks attached to the feet, treating dead gladiators as refuse to be removed rather than human beings deserving respectful treatment. The bodies are then disposed of in mass graves outside the city, mixed together without regard for individual identity or achievement. No ceremonies mark their passing, no monuments commemorate their struggles, and their names disappear from all records except the basic accounting documents that track property losses. They simply cease to exist in any meaningful way, as if they had never lived at all. This complete erasure serves as a final humiliation and reminder that gladiators are property rather than people. Training deaths occur regularly but receive even less acknowledgement than arena fatalities, since they provide no entertainment value to justify the investment loss. A gladiator who dies from infected wounds, training accidents, or simple exhaustion is viewed purely as a business loss rather than a human tragedy. His equipment is immediately redistributed to other fighters, his sleeping space assigned to someone else, and training continues without pause or recognition of what happened. These deaths often result from the accumulation of minor injuries and illnesses that are ignored until they become life-threatening. The lack of adequate medical care means that treatable conditions often become fatal through neglect, creating a steady stream of casualties that never reach public attention but steadily reduce the population of experienced fighters. Suicide represents a form of ultimate rebellion against the system, though it's also viewed as the coward's escape from responsibilities and obligations. Gladiators who take their own lives deprive their owners of investment returns and crowds of entertainment, making suicide both a personal choice and an act of defiance against those who profit from gladiatorial suffering. Some gladiators view suicide as the only way to maintain control over their fate and deny others the satisfaction of determining when and how they die. Methods of suicide among gladiators vary depending on available opportunities and individual preferences for how to end their suffering. Some choose violent methods that mirror arena deaths, using weapons to inflict fatal wounds that demonstrate their continuing warrior identity, even in self-destruction. Others select quieter approaches like refusing food or deliberately exposing themselves to disease, choosing slow deaths that provide time for reflection and preparation. The psychological factors that drive gladiators to suicide often involve the complete loss of hope for any positive future outcome. When the prospect of freedom seems impossible and death in the arena appears inevitable, some fighters choose to end their lives on their own terms rather than provide entertainment for crowds they have come to hate. These decisions often follow traumatic experiences like being forced to kill close friends or suffering injuries that make future success unlikely. Disease outbreaks within gladiator schools create mass casualties that highlight the expendable nature of fighters' lives and the inadequate living conditions that make epidemic illness almost inevitable. When illness spreads through the crowded, unsanitary conditions of gladiator barracks, officials focus on protecting their most valuable assets while allowing less profitable gladiators to die without treatment. These epidemics can kill more fighters than arena combat over short periods. The diseases that commonly affect gladiator populations include dysentery from contaminated water, respiratory infections from overcrowded living quarters, and skin diseases from poor hygiene and shared equipment. Malnutrition weakens immune systems and makes gladiators more susceptible to illness, while the stress of constant training and fear of death further compromises their ability to fight off infections. When disease outbreaks occur, officials typically quarantine the most valuable gladiators while allowing illness to run its course among less important fighters. This triage approach minimizes financial losses while accepting the deaths of gladiators whose replacement costs are lower than their treatment expenses. The callous calculation involved in these decisions reinforces the reality that gladiators are valued only for their profit potential. Manumission, the granting of freedom, represents the only positive escape from gladiatorial life, but it remains extremely rare and difficult to achieve under any circumstances. Freedom must be earned through exceptional performance over many years, requiring not just survival, but consistent crowd appeal and profitability for owners who've invested heavily in training and equipment. The requirements are deliberately set high enough that most gladiators die long before becoming eligible for consideration. The path to freedom typically requires surviving a specific number of arena appearances while maintaining crowd popularity and generating significant profits through victories and entertainment value. Different gladiator schools and owners have varying standards, but most require at least 20 successful contests over multiple years of service. This means that gladiators must not only possess exceptional fighting skills, but also develop the showmanship and crowd appeal necessary to remain popular with audiences. The requirements for earning freedom vary between gladiator schools and individual owners, but generally include surviving a specific number of arena appearances, generating significant profits through victories and crowd appeal, and demonstrating exceptional skill that makes continued ownership profitable. Most gladiators die long before meeting these requirements, as the statistical probability of surviving 20 or more contests while maintaining performance standards is extremely low. Even gladiators who meet the basic survival requirements may be denied freedom if their continued service generates more profit than their replacement would provide. Owners often modify or increase requirements when valuable gladiators approach eligibility, finding excuses to extend service periods indefinitely. Some gladiators who clearly deserve manumission are kept in service for years beyond their earned freedom, simply because they remain profitable. Veterans who approach potential manumission face increasing pressure to maintain their performance levels while dealing with accumulated injuries and aging that reduce their fighting effectiveness. The irony is that gladiators become eligible for freedom precisely when their ability to earn it begins declining due to physical deterioration from years of violence. This cruel timing means that many gladiators lose their edge just as they approach their goal, leading to defeat and death when freedom seemed within reach. The physical toll of gladiatorial combat accumulates over time in ways that make long-term survival increasingly difficult. Repeated head injuries cause cognitive problems that affect decision-making and reaction time. Joint damage from years of heavy training makes movement slower and more painful. Accumulated scar tissue reduces flexibility and creates weaknesses that experienced opponents learn to exploit. Financial considerations often override merit when owners consider granting manumission to gladiators who have met formal requirements. A gladiator who has generated enormous profits might be kept in service indefinitely if he continues earning money at high levels, while one whose profitability declines might be disposed of regardless of his previous accomplishments. Freedom depends more on economic calculations than recognition of service or achievement, making it a business decision rather than a reward for excellence. Some owners develop emotional attachments to particularly successful gladiators and find it difficult to release fighters who have provided years of profitable entertainment. These personal relationships can work either way. Some owners grant early freedom to favourites, while others keep beloved gladiators in service longer than necessary because they cannot bear to lose their company or status symbols. The wooden sword, the rudis, serves as the symbol of manumission when it's granted, representing the formal recognition of freedom and the right to leave gladiatorial service. Receiving this token means that a gladiator has officially completed his obligations and can legally pursue civilian life without fear of being forced back into service. However, the ceremony of receiving the rudis often marks the beginning of new challenges rather than the end of difficulties. Many freed gladiators remain associated with their schools as trainers, or continue fighting as free men for increased compensation, having developed no other marketable skills during their years of service. The transition to civilian life proves difficult for men who have spent years learning only violence and survival, making continued association with gladiatorial schools the most practical option for many liberated fighters. Freed gladiators face significant challenges transitioning to civilian life that often make freedom feel almost as difficult as slavery for men who have been shaped by years of brutality. Years of violence and institutionalization make normal social relationships difficult, as former gladiators often struggle with trust issues, emotional numbness, and difficulty relating to people who haven't experienced life-threatening situations on a regular basis. Former gladiators often struggle with trauma that manifests as nightmares, anxiety, depression, and difficulty concentrating on civilian tasks that seem meaningless compared to life or death struggles. They lack marketable skills beyond fighting, and often face social stigma from their association with the arena that makes employment difficult even when they possess relevant abilities. Many freed gladiators discover that civilian society views them as dangerous outcasts rather than heroic figures. The social stigma attached to gladiatorial service follows former fighters into civilian life, making it difficult to form normal relationships or integrate into respectable society. Many Romans view former gladiators as permanently corrupted by their association with violence and death, making them unsuitable for normal social interaction or business relationships. This prejudice often forces freed gladiators to associate primarily with others from similar backgrounds. The probability calculations surrounding gladiatorial survival are stark and unforgiving for anyone who understands the mathematical realities. Most gladiators die within their first year of service, as inexperience and inadequate training make them easy victims for more skilled opponents. Of those who survive longer, the vast majority die in the arena or from related causes within 5 years of beginning their careers. The tiny percentage who live long enough to potentially earn freedom face increasingly difficult odds as age and accumulated damage reduce their effectiveness against younger, stronger opponents. Even the most skilled gladiators eventually face opponents they cannot defeat, making long-term survival a statistical impossibility rather than simply a difficult challenge. The mathematics of gladiatorial combat ensure that almost everyone who enters the system will eventually die within it. Statistical analysis of gladiatorial careers reveals that survival rates decline dramatically with each additional year of service. While some exceptional individuals manage to survive for a decade or more, these cases are so rare that they become legendary figures whose stories inspire hope, while actually demonstrating how unlikely success really is. The survival curve for gladiators resembles that of terminal illness rather than dangerous but survivable profession. Some gladiators develop elaborate fantasies about life after freedom, imagining reunions with family, peaceful retirement, or starting new careers that would allow them to forget their gladiatorial past. These dreams provide psychological comfort during the darkest moments, but also create additional suffering when reality makes clear how unlikely such outcomes really are. The gap between fantasy and reality often becomes another source of despair rather than motivation. The detailed planning that some gladiators engage in regarding their post-freedom lives serves as a coping mechanism that helps them endure present hardships by focusing on positive future possibilities. However, these plans often reveal how little gladiators understand about civilian life, and how unprepared they are for the challenges that freedom would actually bring. The disconnect between expectation and reality can make achieving freedom feel like a cruel joke rather than a meaningful accomplishment. Alternative paths to freedom occasionally emerge through special circumstances that bypass normal requirements, but these exceptions are so rare that they provide false hope rather than realistic expectations. Imperial pardons granted during special celebrations, victory in commemorative games with predetermined rewards, or intervention by powerful patrons might occasionally save individual gladiators from their fate. These miraculous escapes become legendary stories that inspire other gladiators, while actually demonstrating how hopeless most situations really are. Some gladiators gain freedom through the intervention of wealthy Romans, who become fascinated with particular fighters and use their influence to secure early release. These relationships often begin as casual interest in successful gladiators, but can develop into genuine affection that motivates wealthy patrons to intervene on behalf of their favourites. However, such interventions are extremely rare, and often come with obligations that make the freed gladiator dependent on his patron's continued favour. Religious or political events sometimes create opportunities for mass pardons or special contests with freedom as the prize, but these occasions are unpredictable and often come with conditions that make success unlikely. The irregular nature of such opportunities means that gladiators cannot plan for them or rely on them as realistic paths to freedom, making them interesting anomalies rather than practical escape routes. The ultimate tragedy of gladiatorial existence is that both primary outcomes, death and freedom, are controlled entirely by others rather than by the gladiators themselves. Gladiators can influence their fate through performance and survival, demonstrating skill and courage that might earn respect and favourable treatment, but they cannot determine their ultimate destiny. Their lives, deaths, and potential freedom all depend on the whims and calculations of people who see them as property, rather than human beings worthy of self-determination. This complete lack of agency over their fundamental fate creates a unique form of psychological torture that affects every aspect of gladiatorial life. Knowing that excellence might be rewarded with continued slavery, while failure brings death creates impossible choices and psychological pressures that few human beings are equipped to handle. The system is designed to extract maximum entertainment value, while providing just enough hope to prevent complete despair, creating a cruel balance that maximizes suffering while maintaining functionality. Though less common than their male counterparts, female gladiators, gladiatrices, faced unique challenges that combined the standard brutality of arena combat with additional layers of social scandal and gender-based exploitation. Roman society's complex attitudes toward women warriors created a spectacle that was simultaneously celebrated and reviled, generating enormous crowd interest while violating fundamental social norms about appropriate female behaviour. The sources of female gladiators differed somewhat from male recruitment patterns, reflecting the different legal and social circumstances that could lead women into arena service. While many came through the usual channels of slavery, war captivity and criminal punishment, others were volunteers from the upper classes who sought excitement, notoriety, or escape from conventional female roles that felt restrictive or meaningless. These wealthy participants shocked Roman society by voluntarily entering an arena normally reserved for slaves and criminals. Upper-class women who became gladiatrices often did so as acts of rebellion against family expectations, or social constraints that limited their opportunities for adventure and recognition. Some were motivated by genuine interest in combat and physical challenge, while others sought the fame and attention that successful gladiators could achieve. These voluntary participants brought different motivations and expectations to gladiatorial training, creating complex dynamics within female gladiator schools. Criminal punishment for women could include arena service for serious crimes like murder, treason, or adultery, with particularly scandalous circumstances. Female criminals sentenced to gladiatorial combat often faced longer training periods than males, because their natural physical disadvantages required additional preparation to create entertaining contests. The legal process that led to female arena service was often more complex and controversial than similar cases involving men. Training for gladiatrices followed similar patterns to male preparation, but occurred in separate facilities to prevent the sexual complications that would arise from mixed training environments. Female gladiator schools maintained the same brutal conditioning regimens, weapon instruction, and psychological preparation that characterized male training, but added unique elements related to crowd expectations for female fighters and the different physical capabilities that women brought to combat. The separation of male and female training facilities created different social dynamics and support systems within gladiatric schools. Women often formed closer emotional bonds with their training partners, creating support networks that helped them cope with the psychological pressures of preparing for combat. These relationships could provide crucial emotional stability, but also created additional trauma when training partners were eventually forced to fight each other. The physical demands of gladiatorial training affected women differently than men, in ways that required modifications to standard conditioning programs. While generally smaller and with less upper body strength than male gladiators, women often possessed superior endurance and flexibility that could provide tactical advantages in certain fighting situations. Training regimens were adjusted to maximize these natural advantages while building the strength necessary for arena survival. Female gladiators often excelled at fighting styles that emphasized speed, agility, and technical precision over brute force, making them particularly effective with certain weapon combinations. The retiaria style, which relied on net and trident work rather than close-quarters combat, proved especially suitable for women who could use superior speed and flexibility to avoid close combat while seeking opportunities for decisive strikes from safe distances. Combat styles for gladiatrices emphasized speed, agility, and technical skill over brute force, creating fighting spectacles that differed significantly from male contests. Female gladiators often fought with lighter weapons and armour that allowed greater mobility but provided less protection, creating a different balance of risk and advantage. Popular matchups included female secutores against female retiarii, with the net and trident style particularly suited to women who could use superior speed to avoid close combat while seeking opportunities for decisive strikes. The armour and weapons designed for female gladiators often prioritised visual appeal over practical protection, reflecting crowd expectations for sexualised violence rather than purely athletic competition. Equipment that revealed significant amounts of skin satisfied audience demands for titillation, while actually increasing the danger that female gladiators faced in combat. This decorative rather than functional approach to equipment design created additional challenges for women who had to balance protection, mobility, and crowd appeal. Crowd reactions to female gladiators were complex and contradictory, reflecting Roman society's ambivalent attitudes toward women in public roles. Roman audiences were simultaneously fascinated and disturbed by women engaged in deadly combat, creating a unique form of entertainment that violated social norms while satisfying curiosity about female capabilities in traditionally male arenas. The sight of females fighting violated traditional gender roles while providing a novel form of entertainment that drew enormous crowds willing to pay premium prices for tickets to these unusual spectacles. The novelty value of female gladiatorial combat often meant that gladiatrices received more attention and recognition than male fighters of similar skill levels. Successful female gladiators could achieve fame and notoriety that exceeded what male gladiators might earn through comparable achievements. However, this attention was often focused more on their gender and appearance than their fighting abilities, creating a different kind of objectification than male gladiators experienced. Sexual exploitation was a constant threat for gladiatresses beyond the violence they faced in combat, as female gladiators were viewed as sexual objects as well as fighters. Some wealthy Romans paid substantial sums for private access to female gladiators, treating them as exotic prostitutes rather than professional fighters deserving respect for their combat skills. This additional layer of exploitation created unique vulnerabilities and dangers that male gladiators did not face. The sexual dimension of female gladiatorial service extended beyond direct prostitution to include various forms of abuse and degradation that took advantage of their vulnerable legal status. Female gladiators had no legal recourse against sexual assault or harassment, making them completely dependent on the protection of their owners, who might or might not choose to defend their property against abuse that didn't affect fighting ability. The social implications of female gladiatorial combat created political controversy in Roman society that extended far beyond entertainment preferences. Conservative senators and philosophers condemned the practice as evidence of moral decay and the breakdown of traditional family structures that formed the foundation of Roman civilization. These critics argued that women warriors represented a dangerous inversion of natural order that threatened the stability of society itself. Political opposition to female gladiators often focused on the corrupting influence they might have on other women who might be inspired to abandon traditional roles in favour of pursuing violence and public attention. Conservative commentators worried that successful gladiatresses would encourage other women to reject marriage, motherhood, and domestic responsibilities in favour of careers that violated natural gender roles. Medical care for female gladiators addressed gender-specific issues that male fighters didn't face, creating additional complications for school medical staff. Pregnancy created particular challenges. Pregnant gladiatresses might be temporarily withdrawn from combat or forced to fight despite their condition, depending on their owners' calculations about profitability and crowd appeal. Childbirth in gladiator barracks was primitive and dangerous, often resulting in death for both mother and child. Menstruation created monthly challenges for female gladiators, who had to continue training and potentially fight while dealing with physical discomfort and reduced energy levels. The lack of adequate hygiene facilities and medical supplies made managing menstrual cycles particularly difficult, while the demanding physical requirements of gladiatorial training often disrupted normal reproductive functions. Equipment for female gladiators was often designed more for visual appeal than practical protection, reflecting crowd expectations and the different marketing considerations that applied to female fighters. Armour that revealed significant amounts of skin satisfied crowd expectations for sexualized violence, while providing inadequate protection for vital areas. This decorative rather than functional approach to equipment increased the danger female gladiators faced in combat, while satisfying audience demands for titillation. The weapons selected for female gladiators often emphasized appearance over effectiveness, with decorative elements that made them more visually interesting but potentially less functional in actual combat. Some female gladiators received inferior equipment compared to male fighters of similar skill levels, reflecting the lower investment priorities that owners placed on female fighters who were viewed as novelty acts rather than serious athletes. The psychological pressures on gladiatresses included all the standard terrors of arena combat, plus additional burdens related to gender expectations and social judgment. Female gladiators faced criticism for being unfeminine while simultaneously being judged primarily on their physical appearance rather than their fighting skills. This double burden created unique forms of psychological stress that male gladiators did not experience. Society's conflicted attitudes toward female gladiators created impossible standards that no woman could fully satisfy. Those who fought aggressively were criticized for abandoning feminine virtues, while those who showed mercy or restraint were condemned for weakness that made them unsuitable for arena combat. These contradictory expectations created psychological pressure that could affect performance and mental stability. Relationships between female gladiators developed differently than male bonds due to social conditioning, and shared experiences of gender-based exploitation. Women often formed closer emotional connections than males, creating support networks that could provide crucial emotional stability in an environment where traditional female social roles were completely absent. However, the possibility of being forced to fight each other created the same tragic conflicts that male gladiators experienced, often with greater emotional intensity due to stronger personal bonds. The different socialization that women received made them more likely to provide emotional support for each other, creating community structures within gladiatoric schools that could help individuals cope with trauma and stress. These support systems often proved more effective than the emotional isolation that many male gladiators adopted as protection against potential future conflicts. Training accidents and deaths among female gladiators received even less attention than male casualties, reflecting the lower value that society placed on female lives, and the view that women's participation in gladiatorial combat was inherently less important than male contests. The deaths of gladiatrices were viewed as less significant than male deaths, both because women were generally considered less valuable property, and because their participation in gladiatorial combat was seen as voluntary transgression against natural gender roles. Record-keeping for female gladiators was often less detailed than for males, making it difficult to track their achievements or learn from their experiences. This relative invisibility in official records meant that successful female gladiators were less likely to achieve lasting recognition or serve as role models for future fighters. Career prospects for successful female gladiators were extremely limited compared to males, reflecting society's discomfort with women in violent roles. While exceptional male gladiators might eventually earn freedom or transition to training roles, gladiatrices faced fewer opportunities for advancement beyond continued fighting. Society's discomfort with female warriors made it difficult for even successful gladiatrices to find respectable positions after their fighting careers ended. The few female gladiators who achieved freedom often found civilian life even more challenging than males, because society had no accepted roles for former female fighters. Women who had demonstrated their ability to kill in the arena were viewed as fundamentally corrupted and unsuitable for traditional female roles like marriage and motherhood. The frequency of female gladiatorial combat varied significantly across different periods and locations throughout the Roman Empire. Some emperors encouraged gladiatrices as novel entertainment that demonstrated the breadth and sophistication of Roman spectacles, while others banned the practice entirely as inappropriate for Roman society and damaging to public morals. This inconsistent policy created uncertainty for female gladiators about whether their careers would continue or be suddenly terminated by imperial decree. The changing legal status of female gladiatorial combat meant that women who had committed to gladiatorial careers might suddenly find themselves prohibited from continuing, leaving them in legal limbo with no clear path forward. These policy changes often reflected broader political struggles about the direction of Roman society and the proper role of women in public life. Documentation of female gladiatorial careers is sparse compared to male records, reflecting the lower status accorded to gladiatrices in Roman society and the tendency to view their activities as less historically significant. Many successful female fighters remain completely unknown to history, despite achievements that would have been celebrated if accomplished by male gladiators. This historical invisibility compounds the injustices these women faced during their lifetimes. The lack of detailed records about female gladiators makes it difficult to understand their experiences or learn from their strategies and techniques. Much of what we know about gladiatrices comes from disapproving commentary by male writers who viewed their activities as scandalous, rather than athletic achievements worthy of study and preservation. The ultimate fate of most gladiatrices was death in combat, training, or from the harsh conditions of gladiatorial life, following the same grim pattern that characterized male gladiatorial careers. The tiny percentage who survived long enough to potentially earn freedom faced additional challenges transitioning to civilian life, as former female gladiators were marked by their association with the arena in ways that made normal social relationships nearly impossible. Their unique experience of violence and public attention left them fundamentally changed in ways that society was unprepared to accommodate or understand. The decline and eventual elimination of gladiatorial combat occurred gradually over several centuries, driven by changing religious attitudes, economic pressures, and shifting social values that slowly transformed Roman entertainment preferences and moral standards. The end of gladiatorial games marked not just the conclusion of a particular form of entertainment, but the transformation of an entire civilization's relationship with violence, death, and public spectacle. Christianity's rise fundamentally altered Roman attitudes toward gladiatorial violence in ways that made the continuation of arena spectacles increasingly difficult to justify. Early Christian leaders condemned arena spectacles as pagan rituals that celebrated death rather than life, arguing that watching humans kill each other for entertainment corrupted both spectators and society as a whole. As Christianity gained political influence throughout the empire, pressure mounted to eliminate gladiatorial games entirely as incompatible with Christian values about the sanctity of human life. The Christian critique of gladiatorial combat extended beyond simple moral objections to include theological arguments about the nature of human dignity and the proper relationship between entertainment and spirituality. Christian philosophers argued that spectacles celebrating death and violence prevented spiritual development and encouraged the worst aspects of human nature rather than promoting the virtues that Christianity sought to cultivate. Christian emperors faced political challenges when attempting to eliminate gladiatorial games because of their continued popularity among significant portions of the population. The gradual approach to eliminating arena spectacles reflected the need to balance religious principles with political realities and public expectations that had been shaped by centuries of gladiatorial entertainment. Economic factors contributed significantly to the decline of gladiatorial combat, as the enormous costs of maintaining gladiator schools, training fighters, and staging elaborate spectacles became increasingly difficult to justify. The Roman Empire faced mounting military pressures, administrative expenses, and declining revenues that made expensive entertainment programs seem like wasteful luxuries rather than necessary public services. The cost of a single major gladiatorial spectacle could fund military campaigns or public works projects that provided more tangible benefits to the empire. As financial pressures mounted, officials found it easier to justify eliminating expensive entertainment programs than cutting spending on defense, infrastructure, or administration that directly affected imperial stability and security. Economic analysis revealed that gladiatorial games provided poor return on investment compared to other forms of public spending. While popular with certain segments of the population, arena spectacles required massive expenditures that could be redirected toward more productive uses that would strengthen the empire's long-term prospects, rather than simply providing temporary entertainment. The quality of gladiatorial combat deteriorated as economic pressures reduced training standards and attracted less skilled participants to gladiator schools. As the profession lost prestige and profitability, fewer quality fighters entered gladiator schools, creating a downward spiral where reduced quality led to decreased audience interest, which in turn reduced revenues and made it even more difficult to attract and train skilled fighters. This decline in quality created a self-reinforcing cycle where poor performances disappointed audiences, leading to reduced attendance and lower revenues that made it impossible to invest in better training and equipment. The deteriorating standard of gladiatorial combat eventually reached the point where even enthusiastic supporters of arena spectacles had to acknowledge that the entertainment value no longer justified the costs. The loss of skilled trainers and experienced gladiators through death and retirement created knowledge gaps that made it increasingly difficult to maintain traditional standards of combat excellence. Without proper instruction and mentorship, new gladiators never developed the skills that had made earlier generations of fighters capable of providing truly memorable spectacles. Imperial attitudes toward gladiatorial games varied significantly between different emperors, creating inconsistent policies that reflected changing political priorities and personal preferences. Some rulers enthusiastically supported arena spectacles as essential elements of Roman culture that demonstrated imperial power and provided necessary entertainment for the masses. Others viewed them as expensive distractions from more important governmental priorities that drained resources without providing meaningful benefits. The inconsistent imperial support created uncertainty about the future of gladiatorial institutions that made long-term planning and investment difficult. Gladiator school owners found it risky to make major expenditures on training facilities and equipment when imperial policy might change with each new ruler, potentially eliminating their businesses entirely. Political instability during the later empire meant that emperors often had more pressing concerns than entertainment policy, leading to neglect of gladiatorial institutions rather than active support or opposition. This benign neglect allowed gladiatorial schools to decline gradually through lack of support rather than facing direct suppression. Social changes within Roman society gradually reduced enthusiasm for violent entertainment as the empire became more cosmopolitan and incorporated diverse cultural influences. Traditional Roman bloodlust began seeming primitive and barbaric to increasingly sophisticated urban populations who had been exposed to different philosophical and moral traditions through contact with conquered territories and trading partners. The integration of various cultural traditions into Roman society introduced alternative forms of entertainment that competed with gladiatorial combat for public attention and resources. Theatrical performances, musical concerts, and athletic competitions that didn't involve death began attracting audiences who had previously attended arena spectacles, primarily because no alternatives were available. Educational and philosophical developments within Roman society created intellectual movements that questioned the value and morality of gladiatorial entertainment. Stoic philosophy, in particular, emphasized rational thought and emotional control that was incompatible with the emotional excitement and bloodlust that arena spectacles were designed to promote. The barbarian invasions and political instability of the later empire disrupted the infrastructure necessary for gladiatorial games in ways that made their continuation practically impossible. Amphitheatres fell into disrepair due to lack of maintenance funding, gladiator schools closed due to economic disruption, and the complex logistics required for staging large-scale games became impossible to maintain during periods of military crisis and administrative collapse. Military campaigns required resources and attention that had previously been devoted to entertainment programs, forcing officials to choose between funding armies and supporting gladiatorial spectacles. The choice was obvious when external threats endangered the empire's survival, leading to the rapid abandonment of entertainment programs that seemed frivolous during military emergencies. The breakdown of transportation and communication networks made it difficult to coordinate the complex arrangements necessary for major gladiatorial spectacles. Moving gladiators, equipment, and animals between different locations became dangerous and expensive when roads were controlled by hostile forces and communication systems had been disrupted by warfare. Legal changes gradually restricted and eventually eliminated gladiatorial combat through a series of laws that made traditional practices illegal or economically unfeasible. Laws limiting the enslavement of Roman citizens reduced the supply of potential gladiators, while regulations protecting slaves from excessive violence made traditional training methods illegal. These legal restrictions slowly strangled the gladiatorial system from multiple directions. The legal framework that had supported gladiatorial combat for centuries was gradually dismantled through legislation that reflected changing social values and religious influences. New laws governing the treatment of slaves, the conduct of public entertainment, and the use of imperial resources made it increasingly difficult to operate gladiator schools according to traditional methods. Religious legal requirements that mandated Christian observances and prohibited pagan practices eventually made gladiatorial combat legally incompatible with imperial law. The transformation of Roman law to reflect Christian values created a legal environment where arena spectacles could not continue without violating religious requirements that carried severe penalties. The final recorded gladiatorial games occurred in the early 5th century CE, marking the end of a tradition that had lasted for over 6 centuries and had defined Roman entertainment culture for longer than most modern nations have existed. The last gladiators fought in half-empty amphitheatres before audiences who had largely lost interest in blood sports that had once been the most popular form of entertainment in the civilized world, these final contests lacked the grandeur and excitement that had characterized gladiatorial spectacles during their golden age. The reduced quality of fighters, deteriorating facilities, and diminished audience enthusiasm created a pathetic spectacle that demonstrated how completely gladiatorial culture had collapsed. The end came not with dramatic final battles, but with quiet abandonment as the last gladiator schools closed and the remaining fighters were sold or released. The transition away from gladiatorial entertainment was remarkably peaceful, considering how deeply embedded arena spectacles had become in Roman culture. The gradual nature of the decline meant that society had time to develop alternative forms of entertainment and adjust to new moral standards without experiencing the social disruption that might have resulted from sudden prohibition. Archaeological evidence reveals the gradual abandonment of gladiatorial facilities throughout the former Roman Empire as amphitheatres, training grounds, and support infrastructure were converted to other uses or simply left to decay. Amphitheatres were converted to workshops, housing developments, or fortress complexes that served the practical needs of post-Roman societies. Gladiator barracks became ordinary housing or commercial facilities, while the specialized equipment used for arena combat disappeared from archaeological records. The physical transformation of gladiatorial facilities provides concrete evidence of how completely the culture surrounding arena spectacles disappeared. Sites that had once hosted spectacles attended by thousands of people became ordinary buildings with no trace of their former purpose, except for architectural features that archaeologists have learned to recognize and interpret. Modern excavations of gladiatorial sites continue to reveal details about the reality of arena life that contradict romanticized literary accounts written by authors who never experienced gladiatorial combat themselves. These archaeological discoveries provide more accurate information about living conditions, training methods, and the actual experiences of gladiators than the dramatic but often inaccurate historical sources that shaped popular understanding of gladiatorial culture. The memory of gladiatorial combat was preserved primarily through written accounts that often romanticized or distorted the reality of arena violence to serve the literary and political purposes of their authors. Later generations who never witnessed actual gladiatorial games developed idealized notions about gladiator courage and honor that bore little resemblance to the brutal reality of the arena experience, but served the narrative needs of writers seeking to create heroic stories. These romanticized accounts emphasized the heroic aspects of gladiatorial combat, while minimizing or ignoring the systemic brutality, economic exploitation, and human suffering that characterized the actual experience of arena fighters. The literary transformation of gladiatorial history created mythical narratives that influenced later cultural understanding, but provided little insight into historical reality. The selective preservation of gladiatorial memory reflects broader patterns in how societies remember and forget uncomfortable aspects of their past. The transformation of brutal entertainment into heroic legend demonstrates how historical memory can be shaped by later cultural needs rather than commitment to preserving accurate information about past events. Modern archaeological discoveries continue revealing details about gladiatorial life that challenge popular misconceptions and provide more accurate understanding of what arena combat actually involved. Excavations of gladiator cemeteries, training facilities, and amphitheatres provide physical evidence about the actual conditions gladiators faced, often contradicting romanticized literary accounts that emphasized heroism while ignoring systematic exploitation and abuse. Skeletal remains from gladiator cemeteries reveal patterns of injury and disease that demonstrate the harsh realities of gladiatorial life more accurately than any written source. These physical remains provide unbiased evidence about diet, living conditions, medical care, and the actual causes of death among gladiatorial populations. Scientific analysis of gladiatorial sites and artifacts continues to expand our understanding of how the gladiatorial system actually functioned and what life was like for the people who participated in it. This ongoing research helps separate historical fact from literary fiction and provides more accurate understanding of one of history's most famous but misunderstood institutions. The psychological legacy of gladiatorial combat influenced later military traditions and concepts of honourable combat that persisted long after the games themselves ended. Medieval notions of chivalry and martial honour incorporated elements derived from gladiatorial ideals, though filtered through Christian values that rejected entertainment violence while celebrating military courage in service of religious and political causes. The gladiatorial emphasis on individual combat skill, courage in the face of death, and honourable behaviour in defeat influenced military cultures throughout Europe for centuries after the fall of Rome. Knights and other warrior classes adopted modified versions of gladiatorial honour codes that emphasised personal courage and skill while rejecting the entertainment aspects of arena combat. The cultural impact of gladiatorial combat extended far beyond its original context to influence literature, art, and popular culture in ways that continue to the present day. The archetypal figure of the heroic warrior fighting against overwhelming odds has roots in gladiatorial narratives that have been transmitted through successive generations of storytellers and artists. Educational systems in post-Roman societies generally ignored or minimised gladiatorial history, viewing arena combat as an embarrassing example of pagan brutality that reflected poorly on classical civilization. This selective memory created gaps in historical understanding that persisted for many centuries until modern scholarship began examining gladiatorial culture more objectively and comprehensively. The deliberate forgetting of gladiatorial history reflects broader patterns of how societies deal with uncomfortable aspects of their past. The tendency to emphasize positive achievements while minimizing or ignoring systematic violence and exploitation creates incomplete historical narratives that serve contemporary political needs, rather than providing accurate understanding of past realities. Modern efforts to understand gladiatorial history must overcome centuries of selective memory and romanticization that have obscured the actual experiences of arena fighters. Recovering accurate information about gladiatorial life requires careful analysis of archaeological evidence, critical examination of literary sources, and recognition of the ways that later cultural needs have shaped historical memory. The complete elimination of gladiatorial combat required several generations, as local traditions and informal competitions continued in remote areas long after official games ended in major cities. Some evidence suggests that gladiatorial-style fights occurred sporadically throughout the early medieval period, though these events lacked the institutional support and cultural significance of classical Roman games. These underground continuations often involved desperate individuals fighting for money or food, rather than formal entertainment spectacles. Rural areas with limited imperial control sometimes maintained modified versions of gladiatorial combat that served local entertainment needs while avoiding official attention. These informal contests often used local fighters rather than trained gladiators, and lacked the elaborate staging and regulatory oversight that had characterized official Roman games. The quality and safety standards of these unofficial competitions were generally much lower than traditional gladiatorial spectacles. Some former gladiators continued to make livings through private demonstrations and exhibition fights that provided income while satisfying public curiosity about arena combat. These performances often emphasized showmanship over genuine conflict, and allowed former fighters to use their skills without facing the life or death stakes of actual gladiatorial combat. The transition from deadly spectacle to theatrical performance marked an important step in the cultural transformation away from violence-based entertainment. The transformation of Roman entertainment culture represents one of history's most significant changes in popular attitudes toward violence and death, demonstrating how entire civilizations can develop new moral sensibilities that reject practices their ancestors considered normal and necessary. A civilization that had celebrated public execution and combat sports for centuries gradually developed moral frameworks that found such spectacles repugnant and incompatible with civilized society. This cultural transformation occurred through a complex interaction of religious change, philosophical development, economic pressure, and political evolution that gradually shifted public opinion away from violence-based entertainment. The process demonstrates how deeply embedded cultural practices can be eliminated when underlying social conditions change sufficiently to make them unsustainable. The success of this transformation provides historical evidence that societies can overcome even deeply rooted traditions of violence when alternative moral frameworks gain sufficient influence and support. The elimination of gladiatorial combat shows that cultural change, while slow and difficult, is possible even for practices that seem permanently embedded in social structures. The lessons learned from the decline of gladiatorial combat remain relevant for understanding how societies can address contemporary forms of violence and exploitation. The historical example demonstrates that systematic change requires addressing multiple factors simultaneously. Economic incentives, legal frameworks, cultural values, and institutional support systems must all be transformed to achieve lasting elimination of harmful practices. Modern societies dealing with various forms of violence and exploitation can learn from the Roman example about the importance of comprehensive approaches that address root causes rather than simply prohibiting harmful behaviours. The gradual but ultimately successful elimination of gladiatorial combat provides a model for how determined societies can overcome seemingly intractable problems through sustained effort across multiple generations. And so we reach the end of our journey through the brutal reality of gladiatorial life, where men and women fought and died for the entertainment of crowds who saw their suffering as just another afternoon's amusement. The arena sand that once absorbed the blood of countless fighters has long since been swept away by the winds of history, but the echoes of their struggles continue to resonate across the centuries. The gladiators we followed through training, combat and death were real people with hopes, fears and dreams that were systematically crushed by a system that valued them only as sources of entertainment. Their individual stories have been lost to history. We don't know their names, their backgrounds, or the specific circumstances that led them to the arena, but their collective experience reminds us of humanity's capacity for both extraordinary cruelty and remarkable endurance under impossible circumstances. These men and women faced impossible choices in impossible circumstances, finding ways to maintain dignity and humanity, even when society treated them as less than human. Their courage wasn't the romanticised bravery of Hollywood heroes charging into glorious battle, but the quiet determination to survive another day in a world specifically designed to destroy them. They demonstrated that the human spirit can endure almost anything while still retaining essential qualities of compassion, loyalty, and hope. The bonds formed between gladiators in the face of shared suffering often transcended the artificial divisions that Roman society imposed based on nationality, social class, and legal status. In the barracks and training grounds, Greek philosophers fought alongside Germanic warriors, Roman citizens trained with foreign slaves, and freedmen shared meals with condemned criminals. The arena created a unique form of brotherhood, forged by mutual understanding of shared fate and common struggle for survival. Their daily acts of kindness toward each other, sharing food, treating wounds, offering comfort during moments of despair, represented profound acts of resistance against a system designed to reduce them to mere entertainment objects. By maintaining their humanity in circumstances that encourage brutality and selfishness, gladiators demonstrated that essential human qualities can survive even the most systematic attempts to destroy them. The arena games that defined Roman entertainment for centuries ultimately collapsed under the weight of their own brutality, proving that even the most entrenched cultural traditions can change when societies develop new moral understanding. The end of gladiatorial combat marked not just the conclusion of a particular form of entertainment, but the beginning of different ideas about human dignity and the proper limits of public spectacle. The transformation of Roman society away from violence-based entertainment demonstrates that cultural change, while slow and difficult, is ultimately possible when underlying conditions create pressure for new approaches. The factors that led to the elimination of gladiatorial combat, religious change, economic pressure, shifting social values and political evolution, worked together over several centuries to create a new cultural consensus that rejected practices their ancestors had considered normal and necessary. This historical transformation provides hope that contemporary societies, can also overcome deeply embedded traditions of violence and exploitation when sufficient pressure builds for change. The Roman example shows that comprehensive cultural transformation requires sustained effort across multiple generations, but that such change is ultimately achievable when societies commit to developing new moral frameworks and institutional structures. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that the comfortable distance of history can't completely diminish the reality of what these people endured in service of entertainment. Their voices have been silenced for centuries, but their experiences echo through time as reminders of both human cruelty and human resilience in the face of systematic oppression and dehumanization. The physical amphitheatres where they fought have crumbled into ruins, but the lessons they teach about survival, dignity, and the value of human life remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Their struggles remind us that ordinary people can maintain extraordinary courage and compassion, even in circumstances designed to destroy both qualities. Sleep well, knowing that the nightmares that filled gladiatorial dreams ended long ago, though the lessons they teach about survival, dignity, and the value of human life remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago in the blood-soaked sand of the Roman arena. Their suffering was not meaningless if it helps us understand the importance of protecting human dignity and preventing the development of systems that treat people as expendable entertainment. The gladiators are gone, but their story continues in the quiet moments when we choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and humanity over entertainment. Their legacy isn't found in the ruins of amphitheatres or the fragments of ancient weapons, but in our collective decision to build a world where no one must fight for their life to amuse others. Every time we reject violence as entertainment, every time we recognize the inherent dignity of human life, every time we choose to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them for profit or amusement, we honor the memory of those who died for the pleasure of crowds who saw them as less than human. Their greatest victory would be knowing that their suffering contributed to humanity's moral development and helped create a world where such systematic brutality is no longer acceptable. Their story reminds us that the distance between civilization and barbarism is often smaller than we imagine, and that maintaining humane values requires constant vigilance against the forces that would reduce human beings to mere objects for consumption. The gladiators' experiences teach us that every person possesses inherent worth that no circumstance can eliminate, and that preserving human dignity must remain our highest priority regardless of social pressure or economic incentive. In the end, the gladiators achieved a form of immortality not through victory in the arena, but through the moral lessons their suffering teaches about the importance of treating all people with respect and compassion. Their legacy lives on not in stone monuments or historical records, but in every decision we make to value human life over entertainment, dignity over profit, and justice over convenience. Sweet dreams, and may the peaceful sleep that eluded so many gladiators bring you the rest and renewal that comes from knowing their sacrifices were not in vain if they help us build a more humane world